I went to the bank to ask for a $5,000 loan. My air conditioning had been broken since May, and at 60 years old, I was not going to spend another Ohio summer sweating through my nightgown. $5,000. A perfectly ordinary request. The bank manager, a young man couldn't have been older than 30, typed my name into his computer, looked at the screen, looked at me, then looked at the screen again with the specific expression of someone who has encountered information that does not match what they were expecting. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "you have a balance of $43 million in an investment account under your name. Why would you need a loan?" I asked him if he could repeat that. He did. $43,412,000. An account bearing my name and my social security number. A trust, opened in 2009 in my late husband's name, with me listed as the sole beneficiary. I asked him if I could have a glass of water. He brought it in a paper cup. I drank it slowly and tried to think. My husband had never mentioned this account. Not once. Not in the 7 years between 2009 and the day he died. And in the 8 years since his death, the person who had been managing my finances had never mentioned it either. I drove home on autopilot. I sat at my kitchen table. I put both hands flat on the wood and breathed. And then I started adding things up. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 61 years old. I spent 31 years teaching 3rd grade at Fairbrook Elementary in Dayton, Ohio. 31 years of watching children learn to read and add and tell right from wrong. I could tell when a kid was lying about his homework. I knew when a little girl was hiding tears behind a bright smile. I thought I understood people. I was wrong about the ones closest to me. My husband, Howard, was a quiet man. Not cold, just contained, the way certain rivers are. Deep and steady beneath a calm surface. We married young, built our life slowly, brick by brick. A small house on Sycamore Lane with a porch I loved and a garden Howard could never quite keep alive. He worked in finance his whole career. Not glamorous, not Wall Street, just careful, methodical work at a regional investment firm. He never talked much about money at home. "The money takes care of itself," he used to say, "as long as you leave it alone." I smiled and let him handle it. That was our arrangement, and for 23 years it worked just fine. When Howard died of a heart attack in the spring of 2016, I became a person I didn't recognize. Grief does that. It hollows you out and leaves behind someone who looks like you but can't quite function like you. I forgot to eat. I forgot to pay bills. I stood in the cereal aisle at the grocery store once, holding a box of Cheerios, unable to remember why I'd come. That was when Howard's younger brother Gary and his wife Diane stepped in. Gary was louder than Howard, smoother, always with a firm handshake and a ready smile. Diane matched him perfectly, polished, warm in that particular way that real estate agents and church greeters are warm. They drove up from Columbus the week after the funeral with casseroles and condolences and a quiet suggestion. "Evelyn, honey," Diane said, sitting across from me at my own kitchen table, "you are in absolutely no state to be dealing with finances. Let Gary take a look at things. Just temporarily. Just until you're back on your feet." I said yes. Of course I said yes. I was holding a box of Cheerios in my mind every waking hour. Gary had himself added as co-manager on Howard's primary investment accounts. "Just administrative access," he explained, sliding papers across the table with the ease of a man who had practiced this. I signed where he pointed. I didn't read carefully. I was 55 years old and I signed without reading carefully. That is the thing I will never fully forgive myself for. The years passed. I went back to teaching. I tended my garden. I learned how to be alone. Gary and Diane called on birthdays and holidays, sometimes brought wine when they visited, always asked how I was doing with the practiced concern of people who needed to appear caring. I took it at face value. Why wouldn't I? The first crack appeared 18 months ago. I had decided to update my will, something my friend Ruth had been nudging me about for years. I made an appointment with a lawyer, a clear-eyed woman named Patricia Lennox, and she asked me to bring in a summary of my assets. I pulled out the folder Howard had kept, the one labeled Household Finances in his neat block letters. Inside were account statements, insurance documents, the deed to the house. The numbers didn't add up. I'm a third-grade teacher, not an accountant. But I knew what Howard had told me we had. I knew roughly what retirement was supposed to look like. What I saw in that folder was roughly 40% of what I expected. I told myself I'd misremembered. I told myself the market had been rough. I told myself there was probably a simple explanation. But something small and cold settled in my chest and didn't leave. I started paying attention differently after that. Small things, Gary's new truck, the vacation photos Diane posted on social media. Tuscany, Barbados, a ski lodge somewhere in Colorado. They'd always been comfortable. But this was something else. And when I mentioned to Gary that I was thinking about meeting with a financial advisor, the warmth in his voice dropped by exactly 1 degree. Just 1. But I was a woman who had watched children's faces for 31 years. I noticed. Then came the morning I walked into the bank to ask about a $5,000 loan for the air conditioning. I drove home from that appointment and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Diane had offered to help 8 years ago, and I put both hands flat on the wood and breathed. My garden was visible through the back window, the rose bushes coming in nicely for June. Normal. Everything looked completely mockingly normal. Then I opened my laptop and I started adding things up. By midnight I had a rough picture and it was ugly. From the accounts Gary had managed over 8 years, approximately $380,000 had moved in ways I could not explain. Transfers to entities I didn't recognize. Management fees that seemed invented. Disbursements with no corresponding benefit to me. $380,000, nearly $400,000, quietly redirected over 8 years in increments small enough that no single transaction looked alarming. Here was the thing that frightened me most. Gary didn't know about the trust. If he had known, he would have found a way to get to it long ago. Howard had hidden it deliberately. The beneficiary designation had passed it to me outside of probate, which meant Gary had stolen what he could reach, but he had missed the biggest thing entirely. If I walked into that house and confronted him tomorrow, I would be handing him a grenade. I thought about calling the police. I thought about calling Patricia Lennox. I thought about calling my sister in Phoenix. What I actually did was close my laptop, go to bed, and stare at the dark for 4 hours. Fear is strange. It doesn't always make you small. Sometimes it crystallizes you. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, lying in Howard's house in Howard's bed, thinking about Howard's money that Gary had spent on Tuscany and ski lodges, I felt something shift inside me. The hollow, grieving woman who had signed those papers in a fog 8 years ago was still in there somewhere. But she was no longer in charge. Howard left me this. He built it quietly, carefully over years the way he did everything. He never made a fuss. He just made sure I would be okay. He left it to me, and I was going to keep it. The plan came together over the following week. It was not dramatic. There were no schemes, no clever tricks, no movie moments. It was simply the plan of a careful, patient woman who had spent a career teaching children that the best way to protect something fragile is to be very, very quiet about it. Step 1, say nothing to Gary. Nothing. Not a hint, not a question, not a probing remark about finances. Our relationship would continue to look exactly as it always had. Step 2. Get proper legal representation. Not Patricia Lennox, who was perfectly capable for wills but not for this. I needed a financial fraud attorney, someone who handled exactly this kind of case quietly and aggressively. Step 3. Document everything. Every transfer, every fee, every anomaly. Build the record before doing anything else. Step 4. Secure the trust account. Move it, protect it, make sure Gary could never gain access if he somehow found out it existed. I wrote these steps on a yellow legal pad. Then I tore out the page, folded it twice, and tucked it inside my copy of To Kill a Mockingbird on the bookshelf. The last place Gary Collins would ever look. I made coffee. I went to school. I smiled at my students. I had a plan. The attorney's name was Robert Whitmore, and Ruth had found him for me. Ruth was my oldest friend, the only person I told, sworn to silence over coffee at her kitchen table with a seriousness that surprised even her. "Evelyn," she said when I finished explaining, "are you absolutely sure?" "I'm sure," I said. Whitmore's office was on the 3rd floor of a professional building downtown, thick carpet, diplomas arranged with deliberate modesty on the wall. He was in his late 40s, unhurried, with reading glasses he took off and set down before he spoke. I liked him immediately. I laid out everything. The trust account, the folder, the yellow legal pad, the transfers I couldn't explain. He listened without interrupting. Then he put his glasses back on and looked at the numbers. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "this is a civil matter, potentially a criminal one. Before we determine which, I need certified account records going back to 2016, not your copies. Certified originals from the financial institutions. How do I get those without Gary knowing? Because you are the account holder and the sole beneficiary of the trust. You have the legal right to request complete records independently. Gary has no right to be notified of your request." He paused. "He had no legal right to manage your accounts in the first place without a proper power of attorney, which, based on what you're describing, you never formally granted." That landed hard. I had signed papers at a kitchen table while I was barely functioning. And whatever those papers said, they may not have been what Gary described them as. The record requests went out that week. In the meantime, Gary called. "Evelyn, just checking in. How are you doing, sweetheart?" He called me sweetheart approximately never. I sat on my porch, kept my voice warm. "Oh, just fine, Gary. Beautiful weather. The roses are coming in beautifully. Good, good. Hey, I've been meaning to come up and go over some account paperwork with you. Just routine maintenance." "Of course," I said. "Anytime." I hung up and sat with the roses and the late afternoon light, and the very clear understanding that Gary Collins was beginning to feel something he didn't like. The certified records arrived on a Tuesday. I drove them straight to Whitmore's office. He spent 40 minutes with them while I sat in the client chair and looked at the diplomas on the wall. Then he turned to me and his expression was the professional version of grim. Between 2016 and 2024, approximately $412,000 had been moved from accounts under my name through a series of management fee assessments, advisory charges, and direct transfers to an LLC registered in Gary Collins's name, GC Financial Advisory LLC. This LLC did not appear to have provided any services to me. The transfers had been structured carefully, never more than $18,000 in a single transaction, suggesting deliberate effort to stay below federal reporting thresholds. "Is that a crime?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Structuring transfers to avoid reporting thresholds is a federal offense," Whitmore said. "And that's before we address the fraudulent misrepresentation of the management agreement you signed, which I believe was deliberately presented to you under false pretenses during a period of documented grief. What do I do now?" I asked. "Now," Whitmore said, leaning forward slightly, "we begin to build the case. And you continue to give Gary Collins absolutely no indication that anything has changed." The complaint was filed on a Thursday morning in late July. Simultaneous with the filing, Whitmore sent a formal notification letter to Gary Collins by certified mail, registered delivery, signature required. Gary would know by Friday. I spent Thursday evening in my garden. I pulled weeds until my knees ached, then sat on the porch steps with a glass of iced tea and listened to the neighborhood settle into night. The Hendersons' dog barked twice. A sprinkler ran somewhere down the street. I had set something in motion that could not be undone, and I sat with that fact the way you sit with weather. Not fighting it, just present with it. Gary called at 7:48 Friday morning. His voice was controlled, which was the first thing I noticed. Gary became very controlled when he was frightened. "Evelyn, I got a letter this morning that I think involves some kind of misunderstanding. There are things you don't understand about how Howard managed his accounts. I don't want you getting bad advice from people who don't have your best interests at heart." I forwarded the voicemail to Whitmore and did not call back. They came to the house on Saturday, Gary and Diane, coming around the side gate without knocking, Diane carrying an actual casserole dish covered in foil. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. I stayed in my garden, gloves on, and didn't stand up. "Whitmore handles all communication now," I said pleasantly. "You have his number." Gary's composure slipped just for a moment, a tightening around the eyes. He tried wounded warmth, then veiled threats about what could come out in discovery, about Daniels, about Howard's business dealings, about how judges and juries look at hidden trust accounts. I let him talk. Then I said, "If you had something that could damage my case, your attorney would have used it already. You're telling me about it in my garden without your lawyer present because it doesn't exist. You're very good at suggestions, Gary." He had nothing left after that. They left. I heard the truck start. I heard them pull away. Then I sat on the kitchen floor for a while. Not because I was falling apart, but because my legs had decided they needed a moment. After 8 years of being managed and handled and gently deceived, I had sat in my garden with my gloves on and not moved an inch. My sister Beverly flew in from Phoenix 2 days later, suitcase in hand, fury in her eyes. She sat at my table and read through every document without saying a word for 20 minutes. Then she looked up. "Gary Collins sat at Dad's Christmas table," she said. "I know," I said. "He flew to Howard's funeral," she said. "I know, Bev." She looked at me steadily. "Are you okay?" "I'm more okay than I've been in 8 years," I said. And I meant it. The deposition took place on a Tuesday in October. I had prepared for it the way I prepared for parent-teacher conferences, thoroughly, specifically, with the understanding that the person across from me would try to be emotional and I would need to be the calm one. I knew every number, every date, every LLC formation filing. I knew it all not because I'd memorized it for the occasion, but because I had lived inside it for months, turning it over until it was simply part of what I understood to be true. Gary's attorney had a problem. The LLC had been registered in 2015, 1 year before Howard died. In the 7 months between Howard's death and the first fee charged to my accounts, it had collected exactly $0 from any other client. Its only income in its entire existence had come from accounts it managed under my name and social security number. Whitmore's forensic accountant, a precise, unhurried woman named Dr. Carol Park, had prepared a chart showing all 41 transfers, every single one between $9,000 and $17,500, every one carefully positioned near or below the federal structuring threshold. On cross-examination, Whitmore asked Gary to name one other client of GC Financial Advisory LLC. Gary could not. The silence in the conference room lasted perhaps 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a very long time when everyone in the room understands its meaning. They came back with a settlement offer of $280,000. I set it back down without picking it up. "No," I said. "I thought you'd say that," Whitmore said. The civil trial lasted 3 days in early February. Dr. Park testified for 90 minutes. She walked the court through all 41 transfers, the LLC's formation date, its income history, the structuring pattern. She was precise, unhurried, and answered the cross-examination with the serenity of someone who had done this many times and was no longer impressed by attempts to rattle her. I watched the judge follow every word. I testified for 45 minutes. I described signing the papers 5 days after Howard's funeral. I described not understanding the LLC was receiving my money. I answered every question exactly as it was asked. I paused before each answer, not from uncertainty, but from the habit of care that 31 years of teaching had given me. Say the true thing. Say it once. Say it clearly. The judgment came on a Thursday morning. Whitmore and I sat together in his office to receive it. Full judgment for the plaintiff. Recovery of the $412,000 in fraudulent transfers. Prejudgment interest of $89,000. Punitive damages of $350,000. On the grounds that the fraud had been willful and deliberate, exploiting a specific vulnerability. Attorney's fees of $47,000. Total judgment, $898,000. I read the number 3 times. The federal investigation moved more slowly, as federal investigations do. But by April, Gary Collins and Diane Collins were formally indicted on 3 counts each: wire fraud, bank fraud, and structuring financial transactions to evade reporting requirements. Their attorney withdrew. GC Financial Advisory LLC was dissolved by order of the court. Gary's professional licenses were revoked. The house in Columbus was sold to cover the fines and restitution. Diane's social media accounts, the Tuscany photos, the Barbados photos, the ski lodge, were quietly deleted during the criminal proceedings. Gary was sentenced to 22 months in federal prison plus 3 years of supervised release, in order to pay full restitution. Diane received 18 months of supervised probation and a $95,000 fine, having cooperated with federal investigators. The gavel came down on a Tuesday. I was not in the courtroom. I was in my garden with the last of the autumn roses. When Whitmore called me, I thanked him. I stood there for a long time afterward, looking at what Howard had planted with me years ago. The beds I tended alone. The roses that came back every year regardless. I thought, that's done. I retired from Fairbrook Elementary in June at the end of the school year. My students gave me a card signed by all 22 of them, covered in drawings of flowers and what one boy named Marcus had labeled Mrs. Carter's roses in large, confident letters. I kept it on the kitchen counter for a month. The first thing I did with the judgment money, beyond paying Whitmore's fees, was have the air conditioning replaced. The very thing I had gone to the bank for. The technician explained the new thermostat settings and I thought, this is where it started. $5,000. And a life I didn't know I had. I set up a scholarship at Fairbrook Elementary. The Howard J. Carter Scholarship. A book allowance and a $500 savings bond for college, awarded to a graduating 5th grader each year. Small, exactly the right size. Howard would have wanted nothing showy. The house on Sycamore Lane I kept. I kept coming back to the porch and the garden and the particular quality of afternoon light in the kitchen. The house wasn't haunted by grief. It was inhabited by it, which was different. Grief could be a companion rather than a weight. I had the back garden expanded. A proper rose garden now with a gravel path, a bench, and a small Japanese maple that Beverly chose when she came back in the spring. We planted it together on a Saturday morning, kneeling in the dirt, saying nothing profound, which was perfect. I began to travel. 2 weeks in Portugal in October, Lisbon's hills, the light on the water, the tile work in every doorway. I went alone and found that I preferred it. I ate dinner late, drank very good wine, read on restaurant terraces, and was precisely as happy as I had decided to be. One afternoon in July, sitting on the bench beneath the Japanese maple, I thought, Howard knew who you were. He built that account and left it for you because he believed you would know what to do. He was right. I am 61 years old. I tend my garden. I remember Howard every single day. And I sign nothing without reading it first. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever had someone try to take advantage of your grief, or if you've ever found the strength to fight back when it mattered, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss another story like this one, because the truth has a way of coming out, one way or another.